What's up, world? So welcome back to another one of my Demon Hunter guides where I give you everything you need to know to be successful on Demon Hunter for the season. This time around, we're going to be talking about season 27, which introduces angelic crucible powers. In this guide, we're going to go into grave detail with UE multi-shot Strafe, Strafe Impale, which is going to be a personal favorite for a lot of people, M6 Ray of Light, ZDH, as well as God 6 Demon Hunter. Because there's a lot to cover, I'm going to keep this intro short, so let's dive right on in. Alright, so let's talk about UE real quick, because this is going to be the starter set for Demon Hunters coming next season, and it's a really good starter set that you're going to keep around for quite a bit because it's going to be really good for key farming as well as T16 bounties. This is pretty much your 6-piece set here. Your 2-piece is your generators generate 2 additional hatred and 1 discipline. 4-piece is the 60% damage reduction and increased damage for enemies that are not within 10 yards of you for 8 seconds. So make sure that you're not like strafing or moving inside enemies all the time with this set. And the last one is a pretty important thing to know is the generators multi-shots and vengeance deal 350% increased damage for every point of discipline you have. So that's discipline that is left in your discipline pool, so be careful to not spam too much of any of your discipline skills because that is pretty much your damage for UE. With that being said, you want to increase the amount of discipline you can have by making sure that you have discipline items on your Yangs, your chest, and your DML. And those are really the only 3 places that you can get discipline. You can get it on the Stone of Jordan, but I wouldn't recommend doing so on UE just because they're just better options. We'll kind of talk about that a little later. So just a quick rundown of some skills that you can use. Multi-shot arsenal is going to be the basic one that you use in general. Evasive fire hardening is going to be your standard too, also gives you hatred and also gives you a little bit more defense. Tumble for now because it saves on discipline, but you can also get around pretty quickly. You will trade this out for smokescreen actually instead, okay, because vault is really kind of clunky with strafing around. Then you have invigoration, which of course gives you more discipline. Vengeance Seath to, well, more damage as well as keeping up your resources. And I have companion here, but most likely, well, I'm gonna say most likely, you will change this out the moment that you're able to strafe with Strafe itself. So let's just go with Drifting Shadow. We're just gonna plot this here. These are kind of the typical passives you would generally go if you're doing something more speed related. Obviously, you would change some of these passives out, like Hold the Weaker and or Steadying, or actually Throw the Hunt too as well. And you know, Tactical Advantage and Blood Vengeance, those kind of things that you can kind of go for there. Other than that, you will want to put your Angelic Crucible, your artifact power onto your Yangs because you kind of want to get a good Yangs as soon as you possibly can. And this is kind of the basic of UE. Let's move on. As you're putting together your UE build, the most important thing to do is ready yourself to farm for T16 for keys, mass, gold, and bounty mass. The setup on the left is the likely setup you will end up gearing towards early with a little bit of resources you have at the moment, while the setup on the right is the setup you'll eventually spec into for more efficiency through speed. While most, if not everyone, will be using UE to farm for the considerably stronger and more popular Strafe Impale build, it is important to note that UE Strafe is miles better at T16 content, such as key farming and bounties, than Strafe Impale. So making a viable UE Strafe multi-shot build will have its place throughout your season journey. You can do early speed GRs with UE Strafe multi-shot while gearing up for the other sets. The setup on the left is a typical way you'd go about it, and it's also very similar to how you would push high GRs if you choose to push this on the set leaderboard. You play it a lot like typical UE multi-shot, gathering as much as you can throughout, making big pulls. The setup on the right is the one that I created and pushed rank 1 on the PTR with, and would recommend for more serious players looking to get as much DPS as possible with the inclusion of the Odyssey's End. This setup has a higher ceiling at the cost of being more micro heavy, similar to a dual generator with God 6. So let's briefly talk about the introduction of Shadows, because this is going to be the build that most people are going to be playing and spending the most time on this season because it's an amazing build, very good for speed farming, RGK, etc. So So a lot of people are going to be coming over and be kind of brand new to this. So I'm going to do like a little small breakdown before we get into it. So this is kind of what a 6-piece kind of, you know, set would kind of look like. Talk about the bonuses real quick. Basically the 2-piece gives you a 6,000% multiplier if you wear a melee weapon. So always make sure that you're wearing a melee weapon of some sort, which should be your Carlisle's point anyways. Your 4-piece gives you basically all the effects of shadow power. We'll talk about that in a second, and it makes it permanent. And then the 6-piece gives you just insane amount of damage to the first 3 targets hit, with a little bit of damage to targets that are hit afterwards, depending on the rune that you use. So let's go over to the skills real quick. You're going to have a couple of different choices for Impale. The 3 top choices are going to be Chemical Burn, Over Penetration, and Ricochet. Chemical Burn, which is fire, is going to be the strongest choice for basically all content. It's just the better rune overall. The burn damage stacks really fast with the Strafe power for Strafe Impale. So it's just a really good rune to use. Very close contender to that would be Over Penetration, which basically is the cold rune. It hits everything behind the initial target, so it's pretty popular for more of the AoE situations. And you also have Ricochet, which is lightning. This one doesn't really get talked about nearly as much as I feel like it should, because in a solo speed farm scenario for GRs, Ricochet is actually really strong, because when you're solo farming and you're speed farming, you're not going to be able to line everything up behind like you would if you're using Over Penetration. So Ricochet, with it ricocheting to targets that are not in the line, guaranteeing you to hit 2 more targets after the initial target, actually makes this rune pretty consistent. So if you just get lightning damage on your holy point shot, or your bracers or your amulet, don't just discard it. You know, Ricochet is a very good rune to use. Lightning is actually very good, and in my personal opinion, if for solo farming, I would actually rank Chemical Burn as top, Ricochet as second, Over Penetration as third. Those are your Impale runes that you can use. Go with bolas, simply speaking, just because Freezing Strike kind of helps you out with squirts, uptime, and also gives you a little bit of help for survivability. But you can also go with something like Thunderball to give you more hatred back, or even more discipline with Bitter Pill. It's kind of up to you. Then for Strafe, you have Drifting Shadow. Drifting Shadow kind of makes the most sense because it gives you the most movement speed, and Strafe Pale is kind of slow. However, if you're doing any pushing or anything like that, Rocket Storm kind of would make more sense, because the way that Strafe, the Impale proc from Strafe is a lot like God 6 Demonhunter. So having that rocket to kind of help you proc extra Impales can give you just a little bit of an edge at the cost of movement speed when you're doing higher GRs there. Then of course you have Shadow Power. It doesn't really matter which rune you use, because you get all of them. So in this case, you just choose whatever rune you want that kind of gives you the coolest effect. So then you have Vengeance, because of course Vengeance is, well, just with any Demon Hunter build, you want Vengeance because Vengeance is good. Dark Heart gives you more toughness. And then Smoke Screen, this is going to be a little bit interesting, because the rune to use is going to be dependent on the setup that you go for. I like Vanishing Powder because I tend to go with the Captain Crimson setup, but we'll talk about it more later. But you can go with Special Recipe for less discipline usage, or you can go with Displacement for more movement speed. Generally speaking, these are going to be your damage passives. Ambush is going to be very popular. Cold the Weak and Steady Aim as well. Throw the Hunt is almost a necessity to be able to help you proc Hold the Weak, and also Bane the Trap for one of your legendary gems there. But I mean, outside of that, you will trade these off depending on what you're doing, especially for speeds. You want to do some tactical advantage, so you can trade that for that. Steady Aim if you want for Blood Vengeance if you're having some issues with resources. And then your speed passes would kind of look more like this. In terms of gearing is concerned, we kind of went over that a little bit already, but make sure that you put your Angelic Crucible on your Holy Point shot, because your Holy Point shot is very difficult to get a good one of. So of course you're going to go with the Straight Power. So make sure you put the Straight Power on the Holy Point shot and pretty much call it a day. So this is the basis of it. Let's talk about the builds themselves. For Speed GR XP farm, here are multiple ways you can build Strafe Impale. Regardless of what anyone may tell you, any of these setups work just fine and will mostly come down to personal preference. To help you decide, I'll break down each one. Captain Crimson, sitting at the far left, is a setup that I prefer over the others. It offers both good consistent damage and decent survivability. What makes this different than the others is the utility through resource. Having more resource cost reduction makes for easier management for both hatred and discipline, which can be tricky in speeds, as well as allow for more efficient options for getting around the rift via cooldown reduction and vanishing powder smokescreen with tactical advantage. Another perk is the fact that you will already have Captain Crimson set crafted from playing UE Strafe multi-shot, so you can just slap this on and you're ready to go with no extra materials required. Right next to that is the Guardian set version. This used to be my favorite setup until Blizzard nerfed it by switching to 2-piece and 3-piece bonuses. It is still good, offering good offensive power and survivability early on, though it starts to suffer pretty steep diminishing returns on power the moment you start augmenting several pieces of gear, as the 3-piece does not take into account augmented and paragon main stat. As your season progresses, it is likely you'll transition into one of the other 3 setups. On the right, we have a traditional setup with convention of elements. As with any setup using this ring, its power is based around elemental rotation for big bursts. This is generally not as useful in speed content, as elemental bursts usually don't line up when you want it and generally becomes more overkill more often than not. It shines a bit better in group speeds when you have multiple Strafe Impale users and you can desync cycles for more burst uptime. This also shines in higher GR content such as solo push or RGK. And the last setup, which is on the far right, is All Guilds. This one performs best versus elites due to its extra elite damage, though it's just satisfactory versus trash. This is also the setup with by far the least amount of toughness, so it's usually advised to build into this when you have a bit of Paragon first. Due to its advantage state being mainly versus elites, All Guilds will most commonly be used as an RGK setup. For group speeds, just change out Thrill the Hunt for another damage passive and Taeguk for Bane the Powerful Gem, as you will have a reliable slow in groups and a considerable amount of additive damage to where Taeguk's is diminished greatly. For higher GR groups, Strafe Impale does well as an RGK with the Fire Rune, and you'd want to run All Guilds here with Stricken and all the DPS passives. There is a version where you can run Sunkeeper with Carlisle in the cube, getting rid of Dawn for the most damage possible, though getting a good Sunkeeper and being willing to play in high GRs with Vengeance downtime, thus being really squishy, may not be everyone's cup of tea. If you want to push with this solo, just change up a few passives with any of the setups mentioned earlier and you're good to go. Unlike most setups in the game, you'd want to play this killing mobs along the way and opening up situations to easily snipe elites with the Fire Rune, instead of pulling the entire map focusing on area damage. Many that have attempted the traditional pull the entire rift strat became frustrated on PTR with Strafe Impale, and I had the pleasure of stopping by Raxantrax's stream and Discord to show him how to approach this build in high GRs. As popular and hype as Strafe Impale will be for the next season, this is not the set you want to use if you're looking to compete on the main Demonhunter leaderboards. While it is Demonhunter's second strongest build, it falls behind M6 Ray of Light by around 7 GR tiers. So if climbing the main leaderboard is a goal for you, then stay tuned, I got you covered with Marauder's Ray of Light next. Here, you got 2 different setups you can go for. To the left, you have your standard setup using cluster bombs, and you'll play this mostly the same way you would a traditional M6 Sentry setup. The thing to note here is that cluster bomb room has a short range, so sentry placement is crucial. For those who like to play a little further back, proccing restraint can be a bit tricky due to the short range of cluster bombs as well. You can go with the loaded for bear room with this massive range, but you're losing about 4 tiers worth of pure damage, even though it is easier to line up with for more AoE. I suspect we'll probably see more cluster bomb pushes simply due to its power. To the right is a variation I created on PTR from my rank 1 M6 push, and it involves using Odyssey's End. This relies more on the Sentry auto attack, which is a bit faster with the Angelic Crucible than it is without, and then I just entangle everything. While this setup has more damage potential, it is squishier than the standard and has less resources for vaulting due to the lack of yins. For those wanting to squeeze out the most damage, this is the way to do it, as well as offer a more unique playstyle that differs from the traditional M6 Sentry that we've been doing for the past few seasons. This is the setup that I'll be using when I go for my rank 1 world clear. What you also notice is that I didn't mention Endless Walk as a variation. Generally, I'd make note of it, but in this case, due to the massive difference of sentry attack speed from standing still versus moving, Endless Walk ends up being a pretty big damage loss due to the artifact's effect, and thus I would recommend not going that route. Most that enjoy Endless Walk usually don't really like using squirts. So if squirts isn't your thing, I'd recommend something like S of Johann or Flavor of Time, whichever rolls better, and put the other one on your follower. For each variation, make sure that you use Ray of Light power on your quiver. M6 this season is strong enough to clear a GR 150 as early as around 3500 Paragon with good gear and a great rift. Briefly, I'll cover ZDH as it remains a popular support in the meta for both speeds and group push GRs. Nothing changes here that's out of the ordinary, except for the fact that we'll be using Vengeance with the Vengeance artifact instead of Mark for Death. Considering there's a ton of additive damage already between ZDH and Z-Bar, Mark really won't be missed. The Vengeance artifact launches rockets that deal a percentage of damage to the mob based on max health. While this is a pretty terrible artifact compared to the others, it is free damage that scales with the GR, making ZDH stronger than it's ever been before. You'd keep Smoke Screen for speeds, but switch it out for Guardian Turrets for high GRs. ZDH will be a very popular build this coming season. God 6 is another set I'll briefly cover as not much has changes really here. This season will be the first season where this build will fall off in popularity due to being able to strafe around with other builds that happen to do what God 6 generally does, but better. What I do want to talk about though is that there's a new setup that you can play through Guardians. Guardians make things interesting for God 6, especially with Fortress as it has incredible synergy due to the 3-piece bonus. You'll even see the Amethyst gems and gear as it doubles the value there too. For fun pushing on God 6 leaderboards, you can definitely give something like this a shot as it will make keeping up shields for higher squirts up times a lot easier to manage. You'd also want to go with the Vengeance artifact here and place it on the quiver as the quiver is a nightmare to roll normally. Do not go for the Strafe artifact effect here, as casting spinners on this set that does not boost any spinner damage will result in huge disappointment. Despite the Vengeance artifact being lackluster, it is still better than the Strafe one here. That really does it for God 6. Yo, what up fam? Your boy Dashizi here, and I just want to make a couple closing remarks before wrapping this thing up. If y'all don't know by now, we made Twitch partner fam, but that ain't it up. We also made YouTube partner son. I knew y'all were the real ones, know what I'm saying? But check this out though. We still putting in that work, talking to potential sponsors and whatnot in hopes that we can keep cranking out content for you all fam. I'm even working on trying to get my own little time slot in the die stream, know what I mean? Word on the street though, is that y'all want me around a little bit more than just the raid dance and closing out videos. And you know what? I feel y'all. I'm gonna try to make that happen for real. I gotta bounce. But if you ain't subscribed yet and or followed on Twitch, y'all should go do that. Goes a long way for your boy. And make sure you check out the stream, Twitch stream, link below in the description as we go for yet another rank 1 world Demon Hunter clear. Y'all don't want to miss that. Trust me fam. Leave some comments below and I'll check them out. We active here. Dashizi out.